What's up, guys? This is Nick from P2W Fantasy. I have Anthony, also from P2W Fantasy, on the pod today, talking about a couple different topics that I thought were interesting. And yeah, this is a second video going on the YouTube channel. Most of our stuff's been a lot of articles and polls and things like that. But yeah, I got Anthony, who's just at Anthony Script on Twitter. What's up, Anthony?
How's it going, guys? Good.
So, couple different topics. The first one that I had, obviously one of the biggest pieces of news over the last few weeks, but Dalvin Cook saying that he's going to hold out unless he has a reasonable offer from the Vikings organization. Little background on Cook from this past year. He was the RB6 in PPR. I think he missed a game too. And he was 10th in rushing yards, 4th in touchdowns. The Vikings went to the divisional round of the playoffs. So that's an interesting factor too. So put yourself in the GM shoes, and I'll let you start. But if you are the GM of the Vikings, do you re-sign Cook to a deal?
So, in my personal opinion, we're just talking, not fantasy purposes, but in terms of an actual NFL owner, we're looking at Dalvin Cook. He's still relatively young. So the price tag he's asking for is a lot of money. It's not McCaffrey money. It's a little bit less than that. I do think that they should pay him. The reason behind that is, as you said, they made the playoffs. Do I personally think that the Vikings are one of the better teams in the NFL? Probably not, but they're definitely not in a rebuild. Kirk Cousins is their quarterback. He's a little bit older. They're going to be shooting for it, I think, this year. The Bears are in a tricky situation with Foles. Stafford's coming back for the Lions, but their overall team isn't the best. So that division's wide open. Packers are there, but they're kind of in the middle of a rebuild. They might have one contending season left, in my opinion. So I think now is a good time for the Vikings to shoot for it, go to win the division if they can. And to do that, I think they're going to need to sign Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I agree with that aspect of if they think that they're going to be a playoff contender, that they need to sign Cook, if that's their mentality. Big red flags for me are the injuries. I looked back at his injury history, and I just got a quick list here. 2019 shoulder AC joint sprain. 2018 he had 2 different hamstring issues going on. 2017 we know about the ACL tear. He had a great bounce back from that to do what he did this past year. 2016, he had another shoulder labrum tear. 2015, an ankle sprain, so that one's kind of a wash. And then 2014, another shoulder labrum tear. So a lot of injuries to the shoulder. And I want to give credit to Dr. Edwin. He's at FBI, it's FB Injury Doc on Twitter. We follow each other. He does a lot of great stuff. And I DM'd him today to make sure I can quote him on this. But he said, each time he dislocates a shoulder, further damage is caused to the joint and the bone. Another dislocation of either shoulder could lead to 2 to 3 weeks of missed time at best, and end his season immediately at worst. So for me, it's such a push-pull because I think if the Vikings want to go to the playoffs, they want to take a shot at the Super Bowl. I mean, they were kind of close last year. You go with Cook, but on the flip side, like how much money you're going to give a guy that like could be a shoulder hit away from, having a season-ending injury. So it's like a big push-pull. I might avoid it actually, but that might change the team a lot. I think a lot of people are high on Madison. You got a couple free agents still floating around. Devonta Freeman is still out there. Maybe it's Madison and Freeman or somebody else that's still a free agent. But yeah, interesting thing, push-pull because of the injury for me.
So would you you're opting to not sign him, look to sign maybe Freeman on a 1 year I think he's looking for $4 million a year contract, and hope for the best in case in that term.
I mean, if so many people are high in Madison, and I mean, we've seen some flashes, but not like enough, to declare him like he is one of the best handcuffs according to a lot of people. I'm not saying he is or he's not, but if they roll with a 1 year with that mentality, like let's get to the playoffs, let's make a run. We're going to sign a veteran to 1 year, and then we'll have Madison take the load. I could see it. I mean, will the fans be happy? You just lost Diggs. Now you're going to lose Cook. I don't know. It's a tough one there.
So what would be your advice to Dalvin Cook fantasy owners right now?
I mean, the talent's there, obviously. He produced at RB6. I mean, he was phenomenal. I think he probably won guys a lot of games this year. So my advice would not be to sell him low. If you want to, it's tough because if you want to shop him, people might be nervous to get him. I think he's just a hold for me because I don't think you're going to shop him and someone's going to jump on like a huge offer for him right now in comparison to playing. What about you, though?
I mean, I agree with you. I've seen a lot of owners on Twitter panicking a little bit, worried about the holdout, but I also seen a lot of people who don't own Dalvin Cook trying to buy him for the low right now.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of great offers for him right now, so I think he's worth more than what's being offered for him right now, so I would definitely hold on to him, hope for the best, and hopefully he plays this year and gets some points like he did last year.
Yeah, that's true. I agree on that. So I think we might disagree slightly on if we were the GM, but I think we also both kind of see the other side of the decision there. So we'll move past that one. And again, just got a bunch of random topics today because I think they're interesting and easy to talk about. So I was looking at some wide receiver projections and looking at what guys did last year, what they could do this year. Michael Thomas having the 149 reception season, even without Drew Brees. I think most people will put him as their, wide receiver 1 for next season. I mean, we can debate that at a later time, but I probably would, and I think consensus would. Let's say in a hypothetical world, we're predicting 2020, and Michael Thomas is not the wide receiver 1. Who do you think is a guy or two? If you got 2 guys, if you got 1 guy, whatever the case is, who do you think has that potential to overtake that wide receiver 1 finish in 2020?
That's a good question. Obviously, I think very highly of Michael Thomas, so he'd probably be my answer if I'm talking about 1 guy.
Yeah.
If we're not talking about Michael Thomas, there's a couple guys I would say come to mind, but immediately, and I think he's a little underappreciated, is I think Tyreek Hill has all the abilities to be a number 1 fantasy wide receiver, not only because of talent, but target value. He gets a lot of catches. He has Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback, which is obviously a huge benefit.
I heard that's a good thing to have.
Yeah, definitely. And if he stays healthy, I mean, we're looking at over 1,000 yards receiving, probably in the top 5 to 10 in receptions, in my opinion, even with Kelsey there. The speed is there. The speed is killer. So if he's healthy, if Mahomes is healthy, everything plays out the right way. I would not be surprised if Tyreek Hill is a wide receiver 1 at the end of next year's fantasy season.
All right. Yeah, I wrote down 2 guys, and one of them was Tyreek Hill. Just because, I mean, 2018 wide receiver 3, having Pat Mahomes, Kelsey's going to eat for sure. He's going to get a large volume, but just that big playability because of the speed. And, that offense is always going to be throwing the ball. Andy Reid likes to let Mahomes throw the ball. It's very explosive. So I can see it if it's a full season, no suspensions, no injuries, could be Tyreek Hill. The other guy I wrote down, and I hate to say this because obviously we're from Chicago and we're Bears fans, and I don't like their quarterback too much, but 12 games this past season, Davante Adams had 83 catches in 12 games, 127 targets in 12 games. I mean, we're comparing him to guys that are playing 17 games or whatever, or 16 games, I mean, and they're not even touching that number. So I think, and that was 6.91 a game, I think it was, catches, but just something unbelievable. Rodgers' eighth in attempts this past year. We know they didn't add wide receivers. We were all surprised by it. I think we're probably on the same page with this, but I think Allen Lazard might step up. They have a good connection on and off the field. He might step up into that, wide receiver 2 mark. They got Funchess, however you say his last name there. Sorry if I said it wrong. But yeah, there's too many question marks at wide receiver. And I think we've seen Aaron Rodgers, and I'm not a huge fan, but we've seen Aaron Rodgers Davante Adams throughout his entire route and hit him and not even look elsewhere. If you were an MVS owner at one time, you hated that, or whoever else was the case. But Davante Adams would be my other guy that if he plays a full season at 16 games, maybe he could push for it. So that's just another guy I threw in there.
Going off of that, one thing I would say about that, which I don't think people really take into consideration a lot, is I think Davante Adams obviously has the ability. I think Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I think he's going to be on a mission this year. I think in order for Davante Adams to be a number one fantasy receiver, he's going to need another receiver on his team to step up. It's going to be very hard to be a wide receiver 1 when you've got you're getting double covered, triple covered every single play. Last year they didn't have a difference maker outside of him and Aaron Jones, but he's a running back. You look at Tyreek Hill, he's got Kelsey. You look at Michael Thomas. Jared Cook had a great year last year. You got to have somebody else to take a little bit of pressure off of you. So if Lazard steps up this year, I could definitely see Davante Adams being in that category, fighting for that number 1 spot.
Yeah, and he will have a chip on his shoulder for many reasons, and maybe a guy like Sternberger at tight end steps up too and is a good outlet, just because Jimmy Graham, and he's a Bear now, but Jimmy Graham wasn't a guy that was getting 6-7 catches a game like a guy like Kelsey was. So yeah, I think. What about just briefly? What about Julio having one last shot at a wide receiver 1 status? Any thought on that?
I've always been a Julio fan, but in my opinion, with Julio, the biggest thing that's against him is his age. And he's got Calvin Ridley behind him. He's got Russell Gage behind him. A lot of people are high on Hurst. You got to think all of those guys are going to be getting targets. I actually see Gage and Ridley getting more targets this year. I think Julio still gets his, but I think the ball is going to be spread out a little bit too much to put him in that top tier. Mm-hmm. I still consider him a top 10 receiver for 2020, but I don't know if it'll be closer to the 1 or 10. If I had to guess, I would put him probably closer to 10 just because of all the other targets that are on that team.
Yeah, I was just looking at him over the past couple of years being a consistent top 1 through 5 wide receiver just over time, and it was interesting. But I think he'll still be elite. But yeah, that's a couple guys that could make that list. So I think we can move on to the next topic. So we saw the hyped up video. I thought it was going to be like a Gatorade commercial or Nike or something like that, but it was Cam Newton throwing the ball to OBJ, and both of them were I think, pretty amped up for that video, and a lot of people are still asking the question of why is Cam still a free agent. I would say most likely has to do with the coronavirus and not being able to fully get a good physical of him, things like that, maybe. But what do you think is give me 2 landing spots that you think would make sense for Cam or would be ideal for Cam, whatever your take is. What's 2 teams that come to mind? And if you got 1, if you got 3, whatever the case is, I just wrote down 2 just to be, kind of brief on it.
I think me and you are going to agree on the 2. But before we get to that, I do want to say I'm a little disappointed and confused in the Redskins' approach to their quarterback situation. They have Ron Rivera as their their coach. He coached Cam Newton. He knows how to use Cam Newton. And instead of getting Cam Newton, who did take the Panthers to the Super Bowl, he opted to sign Kyle Allen over him. Actually traded for Kyle Allen. So that was very surprising to me. I'm not really liking Haskins being their full-time starter. I think they've got a lot of good young receivers on that team now. You got McLaurin, Antonio Gandy-Golden, Sims Jr. They've got weapons this year, and it's disappointing knowing that if Haskins isn't good or if he plays like he did last season, that team's just not going to be good. I would hope he would have signed there, but I don't think that option's on the table anymore for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. So the two teams that I do see as good landing spots, and me and you probably agree on this, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. They don't really have a good backup situation. We saw that last year when Big Ben went down. Big Ben's also, I believe, 38 years old. He's getting towards the end of his career. Cam could be the perfect guy to fill in if Big Ben gets hurt again or if he decides to retire. And the other spot would be the Jacksonville Jaguars. I have to say them just because I'm not really sold on Minshew being their franchise quarterback. I think he is a fan favorite more than an actual elite quarterback. He could use his legs. I'm not sold on the fact that he can make that team as successful as they should be because their defense is pretty decent. They've got Fournette still, regardless of what happens to him. They got a couple weapons at receiver, but that would be a good landing spot if Minshew's not making the cut to get Cam out there and hopefully bring them some wins.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I had both of those. I got a third one just as a spicy take. But, yeah, with the first team I said was Jaguars just because, I mean, Minshew, again, fan favorite. He had some great weeks, but he also has some pretty bad weeks too. I'm not sure he's their long-term quarterback. I make jokes about, him warming up the spot for, like a Trevor Lawrence or something like that. But I thought, the Jags I thought was a good spot because they didn't have – I thought they might have drafted a quarterback from this past class, but that was probably my number one. Pittsburgh's another good one because Big Ben might be 1 year out of retirement, might be 3 or 4, but regardless, they got some good weapons there. We've seen more receivers step up with Juju and Deontay Johnson. James Washington's interesting. Just got Chase Claypool. They got a couple good running backs. If Connor's healthy, that's their guy. Ebron's on the team. I thought maybe, after having the nightmare of Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, who were awful, they were horrible if you look at their stats, that they would look to get Cam. So I was kind of surprised by that too. Spicy take. What do you think of this though? This team just improved their weapons immensely. They have 2 solid running backs. They have a couple good receivers. Our fantasy prospect receiver number 1 for both of us. What happens if Drew Lock does not perform and you got all those weapons on the Broncos? I was thinking about that earlier. I mean, we've only seen a couple games of Drew Lock and his stock just went crazy, which I think it should because he's in a great spot. But what happens if he's not successful?
No, that's actually something I didn't think about. I'm somebody who I believe he has potential, Drew Lock, but I don't know that he's the answer to make that team take that next step. We've seen five games, I believe, of Drew Lock. I wasn't very high on him out of college. At Mizzou, I thought he was pretty good, but not anything I would go crazy over. A lot of people I think are very hyped on him because he was rapping to a pregame song and they like that and they like his swagger a little bit. Yeah. But I need to see it on the field more. He's got great weapons, arguably one of the best situations you can be in for a quarterback, in my opinion. You got great receivers, you got great running backs. The line is good. So That's actually a good take. I mean, if Drew Lock isn't the answer, maybe needs to take another year or two sitting behind somebody and learning. So I like that.
Yeah, I thought about it, and I actually think he did show some good flashes, had some big yardage games, within the 5. He threw some touchdowns, had a few interceptions, but yeah, we don't know as much, and I don't even know who the backup is, to be honest. But yeah. Next topic. I got 3 tight ends, 3 young tight ends who all have had situational changes on their teams. And I think that looking at rankings, they're all pretty close. And I'll actually read off the rankings for you, just 2 that I looked up. But the 3 tight ends are Jonnu Smith, Tennessee Titan, Chris Herndon from the Jets, and then Ian Thomas from the Panthers. So Jonnu Smith, we don't have Delaney Walker anymore. Steps into that role. He got a lot of time this past year. Tannehill's going to have a full year at quarterback. Derrick Henry's going to have his second full year at running back. A.J. Brown, different factors with that. Chris Herndon changes to the offensive line. He hasn't really played since 2018. Had the suspension and then hamstring injury and then a rib injury this past year when a lot of people wanted him to play. Ryan Griffin was in his place before. Ian Thomas, new head coach, new quarterback, another wide receiver added. Greg Olsen is gone. So all 3 of these guys have different changes to their situations. Looking at dynasty-wise, Fantasy Pros combines their rankings. You and I both look at that from time to time. They have Jonnu Smith at tight end 15, Ian Thomas at tight end 18, and then Chris Herndon at tight end 21. On the flip side for redraft, the ESPN analysts, Matthew Berryfield, Yates, Mike Clay, their consensus, so when they put them all together and how it looks, their 2020 outlook is Jonnu, tight end 21, Ian Thomas, tight end 23, and Chris Herndon, tight end 19. So if we're looking at, let's just look at 2020. Out of the 3, who finishes the highest for tight ends in 2020? What's your take on that?
Those are actually pretty interesting. The rankings there that you named off. Personally, I'm not sold on the fact that Ian Thomas is going to have a huge role in that offense. I think that McCaffrey is still going to be McCaffrey. I think DJ Moore is a rising superstar in the league. And they've got Robbie Anderson. They've got Curtis Samuel. I don't know if he will be a huge part of that offense. He might just be a guy that occasionally has a decent game. So he's actually, out of those 3, going to be my tight end 3. The other 2 I would say are fairly close. Strictly based on the situation, I would say that Herndon is my number 1 going into 2020. That's because the Jets really don't have a true wide receiver 1 right now. They signed Perryman. He had a good end of 2019, but has never had a huge role in an offense. They've got Mims, the rookie from Baylor. I think he's explosive, but you can't really rely on him to be a number 1 right away. They got Le'Veon. So I think Herndon's going to step in, pick up where he left off with Darnold, and they've already established a little bit of a connection. So I could see them linking up and him actually having a great season this year. It's going to be somebody who, if you can, I'll try to trade for now while his value is not very high. Jonnu, I think, has a lot of hype around him right now. Tannehill had a good season last year. But I also think that's another situation where Derrick Henry is going to get his carries. A.J. Brown figures to be more involved. They love him there. He's got a lot of potential. And somebody that we don't really talk about a lot is Corey Davis. He's got 1 year left on his contract with them. He's going into a contract year. They declined the option. He's going to be a free agent. He's going to do everything he can to make a statement this year. So I'm not saying he's going to have a huge role, but there's going to be a lot of mouths to feed on that offense as well. So I would say Jonnu will have good games. He'll be fairly consistent in terms of getting you okay points for a tight end. But he will be my tight end 2 out of those 3.
Okay. Looking at this past year, Jonnu Smith, the things that stand out are his yards per catch is very high, 12.5 yards per catch, which, I mean, that adds up for fantasy purposes when he's getting the yardages. 79.5 catch percentage, which is also very good. He did play in 16 games this past year, which I think people are kind of overlooking. He had 14 starts in those. So I think people are like, oh, Delaney Walker is gone now. But, I mean, was he really there this past year? The Titans historically have used their tight end a lot, but my concern is just the throwing volume on a run-heavy team. The yardage there, is good for him. Maybe his receptions and his targets are going to increase. He's going to give you some bigger plays. He actually, on his highlight tape I was watching, had a few rushes out of the backfield, which was interesting. But yeah, I just don't know if the volume is going to be there for him to really separate himself from some of these other guys that he's close to projection-wise. Ian Thomas, weeks 13 through 17 last year, not this past season, the season before, he was tight end 6. So he was actually pretty involved. And he had some big weeks with that, and he had some high catch counts. The one knock I've read about is his catch rate is a little shaky. I can attest to that because I remember in your league, first year I was in that, I'm pretty sure I was like a catch away from going to the next round of the playoffs, and he dropped the ball. So I did see that firsthand. I read something else too, that Teddy Bridgewater has a good connection, with his tight ends. But kind of like what you said, so many pieces in that offense. And, McCaffrey's obviously number one, and you got DJ in there who's going to be very good too. What his role is going to be, I don't know. Maybe an red zone kind of guy. But my pick's Chris Herndon. We want a full season of Herndon. We don't want him suspended for stuff or hurt. So that'd be great. Tight end 9, week 6 on. I believe it was his rookie year. It was in 2018. So he already was in that top 10 tight end tier early on when he was first involved. And he was on the field for 63% of those plays back in 2018, which is huge. And I know the Jets want to throw the ball. They might be chasing some games or behind. So I don't think you have to worry about the volume there. Even looking at this past season, Ryan Griffin had some huge games. He had 3 games with 5+ catches, and he even had 2 weeks looking at scoring where he was over 20 points. So, hats off to him. He's a different player than Chris Herndon, but I think Sam Darnold has a connection with him. I think he can be a major red zone target. I think he's going to get, he's going to have games where he's going to catch the ball 5 to maybe even upside of like 8 times, like something crazy like that. Could be a thing for Herndon, I think, over these other guys. So I think volume is key for tight ends. We see it with Kelsey, great volume. Even Kittle's on a run-heavy offense, but he gets a large volume share. Waller this past year had a large volume share, and I think Chris Herndon's more set up in comparison to these other 2 guys.
Yep, I completely agree with that. One thing that I do think about in terms of Jonnu taking over that tight end spot too is you got to think about it. Like with the Patriots, obviously Tom Brady loves Gronkowski. Do you know who played tight end for the Patriots last season?
For the Patriots, no, Lacoste or something like that. Right? Am I right?
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you. That's my whole point on that is even though Delaney Walker is gone, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to take over the same amount of target share. He's got to be getting separation, and he's got to be getting open to get those catches. So it'll be interesting to see, but I completely agree with everything you said. I'm taking Herndon before the other 2.
All right. We don't agree too often on things, but sometimes we do, so that's good. Last topic of the day for this episode. Tua, drafted first round, pick 5. The very next pick, Justin Herbert drafted. So Tua with the Dolphins, Herbert with the Chargers. Let's take a look into 2020. Which one of these guys do you think plays more games? And you can talk about some factors, but at the end, need an answer. This guy over this guy.
So if I was to take one or the other, or had to pick who was going to be the first one to start, I would personally have to say I think Herbert starts before Tua. I think Fitzpatrick for the Dolphins did a great job last year. I think he's a little underappreciated for what he did. I also believe that Brian Flores said at the end of the day, he's going to do what he needs to do to win games.
Yeah.
So I don't know that he's going to be fully confident in Tua being the starter out of the gate. I think he is going to need some time to adjust. I think they're going to want to make sure he's fully healthy before putting him out there. And I think they roll with Fitzpatrick as long as they can. I mean, he's an older quarterback, but Fitzpatrick is extremely smart. He knows that offense. He knows those players. So I think that's a huge factor compared to Tyrod Taylor with the Chargers. Tyrod Taylor was not the starter last year. He doesn't have a connection with these receivers just yet. He was on the team, but that only means so much. Herbert, I believe they might not start right away, but I also believe that Tyrod Taylor is 1 to 2 bad games away from not being a starting quarterback again. So I truly believe Herbert will start beforehand simply because Tyrod Taylor knows the offense but hasn't played as their starting quarterback. He probably doesn't hold as much respect on the team as Ryan Fitzpatrick does with the Dolphins. And I also think Brian Flores wants to win, and he's going to do what he needs to do to win games. If that means starting Fitzpatrick as long as he can, he's going to do that.
All right. So you're going Justin Herbert will play more games, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Looking at a quote from Anthony Lynn, head coach of the Chargers, he was talking up the confidence in Tyrod. We're going into this thing day one. Tyrod Taylor's going to be starting it off, he said. I'm not sure if this may have been actually after the draft. He was quoted saying that. Talking about Tyrod, he's not a big turnover guy. I think he managed the game decently. He's got a rushing ability, which adds to the team too. On the flip side, looking at Fitzpatrick, I saw the stat today and I had to tweet it out, but week 6 through 17 this past season, he was QB2, Fitzpatrick. Insane. So, I mean, he balled out. He won people championships. I mean, I had him on a team that won a championship, and he was one of my starting super flex players. But, yeah, it's interesting. I think I like what you were saying about Flores wanting to win. I'm a big fan of Flores, especially what he did last season. I think they were kind of mad at him because he was finding ways to, compete and win some games when they probably wanted to tank a little bit, but it worked out for them. But I'm kind of on the boat where if he's healthy and he looks good, I think they talked about bringing Fitz back. And I kind of wonder if it was because they wanted him to lead the organization or maybe because he's such a smart guy. And, I mean, where'd he go? Harvard or Stanford or something like that? I mean, he's just like a super smart quarterback. And I think he could be a true asset as a mentor. I think that might have been more of the reason they brought him back. Also knowing that Tua's had some injuries. But I think if Tua's healthy, he could step in and start day one potentially. I mean, it's tough when Fitzpatrick was balling out the way he was, but I mean, they drafted a guy in early and passed on some other guys. So I don't know. I think we talked about this before. I think it's either like a day one he's a starter or he's like not playing until like way later in the season. Which with Tyrod, I think he's got some connections with the coaching staff. I'm not a Tyrod Taylor believer. I think he starts the season as the starter, and I think he loses his job pretty quickly to Herbert. I think they might roll with him and say, hey, we're going to give you a shot out of respect, for your grind for this organization. but yeah, only 91 passes he's thrown in the past 2 years. Is he as fresh as Herbert in terms of like him being in this program? I mean, he's throwing the ball, 90 something or whatever times more than Herbert has. That's not a lot. So I'm going to go with Tua potentially being the day one starter. I'm going to go with Herbert potentially being like week 3 starter. So I think it's very up in the air either way.
One thing I think works against both of those quarterbacks, though, is the talks of the shortened offseason. I heard that they're talking about only playing 2 preseason games, and training camp's going to be shorter. That actually is going to hurt both of their chances to play early, in my opinion. It does take some time to learn a playbook. It does take some time to build chemistry with your teammates. Having only 2 preseason games, it might hurt both of their chances to be starters early. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how that plays out. And if either of them do take over early, I wonder how good that they did look in preseason, because then I might be a little bit more interested in picking them up.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Understandable, and that's fair. Think that's good for this podcast. So quick review, Dalvin Cook, GMs. We could see both sides. You said yes, I said no on the re-signing. Wide receiver 1, not named Michael Thomas. We both like Tyreek Hill. We threw in Davante Adams in there as well. Cam Newton, Jaguars, and Pitt, we both agreed on, with the spicy take being the Broncos. Jonnu Smith, Herndon, Ian Thomas. I think we both liked Chris Herndon out of that. And then QBs we're pretty close on, and pretty much I think the consensus with us is it's pretty up in the air right now. But yeah, that's it for today's podcast. Again, I'm Nick, and this is Anthony, both from P2W Fantasy on Twitter at P2W Fantasy. And we would like for you guys, if you feel a certain way on any of these topics, to shoot us some comments on Twitter once it gets posted. If you want to rip on myself or Anthony, he might be a little bit softer than me, so go easy on him. But we'll be able to take it. But yeah, anything else, Anthony?
No, that's pretty much it. I think we agreed and disagreed on a lot, but it could go either way on all those things. So we'll see what happens.
All right, cool. All right, thanks, guys.